The Tyrion Lannister you see in Game of Thrones is not actually Tyrion Lannister.
Liar!
They have some similarities to be sure, and at the start of the TV show, you could be mistaken for thinking it's really him. But the more the show progresses, the clearer it becomes that the Tyrion we see on the screen is very different to the Tyrion we know from the books. Tyrion is a character who really needs no introduction. Game of Thrones is one of the most popular fantasy series ever, and Tyrion is one of its most iconic and recognizable characters. His combination of wit, intelligence and complexity made him an instant fan favorite, and we have to give credit to Peter Dinklage, who did a great job playing him. But, and there's always a but, I think the TV adaptation sacrificed not only the most complicated and nuanced parts of the character, but actually the fundamental core of Tyrion. What made him so compelling in the book series? And so what we're left with in the show is a good character for sure, at least for the first few seasons, but also a shallow version of his true book self. Now, this might seem like a bold claim, especially if you're only familiar with the TV version of Tyrion. But if you've watched some of my other character videos on the channel, you'll know I love to deep dive into the differences between book characters and their adaptations. Now, of course, there'll always be something lost when you adapt a character for the screen, but I'm a firm believer that to truly adapt a character well, you need to intimately understand them. Understand what it is that drives them, what makes up their core, their very heart. Only with this understanding can you bring the character to life, while staying true to the original vision and what made them work. There's a reason Tyrion's character got worse instead of better as the TV show went on, and it's because the show left out his core drivers, ripping out his beating heart. So let's get to it. There are two key areas where I think the show failed with Tyrion, and for each example I'll be talking through scenes in both the show and the book, and I'll also talk about exactly why I believe the book portrayal was better than the show, without just pointing out the differences and saying the book was better. So the 2 points are that firstly, Tyrion's dark, cruel side is absent in the show, and secondly, Tyrion's physical appearance, where he's significantly better looking in the show than in the book. Starting with the first point. In the TV show, Tyrion is cunning for sure, and he can be ruthless when crossed, but really he's ultimately a good person.
One word and I hit you again.
He cares for those close to him. He has genuine affection for the women he pays. The focus is very much on his charm and his intellect. The book version of Tyrion, by contrast, is a very different sort of person, a much darker and more vindictive character. Someone who can be utterly, terrifyingly ruthless, crossing lines and moral boundaries that his show self would never attempt to do. To really understand Tyrion, it's really important to understand the source and nature of this inner darkness, so I will be getting to it, but just before I do, let's look at a couple of examples of Tyrion's differences in the book and the show. So up first is a scene where Tyrion utters one of his iconic lines. A day will come when you think yourself safe and happy, and suddenly your joy will turn to ashes in your mouth, and you'll know the debt is paid. Words uttered to his sister, Cersei Lannister. So let's talk about the show version first. I can't show the whole scene for copyright reasons, but basically in the show, after Cersei mistakenly thinks she's discovered the girl Tyrion loves, she has her brought before him in order to use her against him. We see that Tyrion immediately goes to her and tells her he's sorry they hurt her and he promises to free her, to which she responds asking him not to forget her, and he responds never, before turning to Cersei and saying the famous line about her joy turning to ashes. Now in this scene, both the audience and Tyrion know that Cersei has got the wrong girl, but Tyrion is shown here to genuinely care for her. Ros is her name. His words and delivery are emphatic. He immediately goes to her and caresses her when she's brought in. Now, I suppose it's possible he was faking or playing up his concern, but to me at least it seems genuine, especially given how Tyrion is shown to treat other similar women throughout the show. For example, after he leaves Westeros and goes east, we see him treating another similar woman with kindness and compassion. By contrast, the way this plays out in the book is very, very different, in some subtle ways and in some not so subtle ways. I'll flash up some of the relevant passages as I talk through this as well. In the book, After the girl is brought in, who is named Alaya? Let's just call her Not Rose. Tyrion's near immediate reaction is one of happiness. Look at this passage. Tyrion wanted to laugh at her. It would have been so sweet, so very, very sweet, but it would have given the game away. You've lost, Cersei. Look at the language choice here. Sweet, so very sweet. It's the sense of victory, of jubilation as he has outwitted his opponent. He even thinks of it as a game, thinking he can't give the game away. He also doesn't immediately go over to Not Roz to caress her, as he does in the show scene, even though she is hurt much more significantly than in the show, showing bruises all over, hands bound, and mouth gagged, instead of just the cut lip she has in the show. There's also a large chunk of this scene missing in the show. In the book, Tyrion threatens Cersei as follows, warning her not to harm the girl. Whatever happens to her happens to Tommen as well, and that includes the beating and if she thinks me such a monster, I'll play the part for her. Cersei had not expected that. You would not dare. Tyrion made himself smile, slow and cold. Green and black, his eyes laughed at her. Dare? I'll do it myself. Obviously a chilling and disturbing threat. The show version of Tyrion would never go to these lengths. He'd never utter such a cold, callous, and ruthless threat. We also see as the scene continues that Tyrion physically overpowers and hurts Cersei. His sister's hand flashed at his face, but he caught her wrist and bent it back until she cried out. Osfryd moved to her rescue. One more step and I'll break her arm, the dwarf warned him. Do you see the differences here? The show Tyrion is unambiguously in the right, defending himself and Roz from his psychotic sister as she threatens him. But the book Tyrion crosses the moral line, threatening to beat and his own nephew. And arguably worse still, he threatens Cersei not because he loves the woman she holds captive, because of course we know that Cersei has the wrong person, but simply to project an image, to maintain power over her. If she thinks me such a monster, I'll play the part for her. Now, if you haven't read the books, you may be tempted to assume that Tyrion is bluffing here, but I'll let the man himself speak. I promised my sister I would treat Tommen as she treated Not Roz, he remembered aloud. He felt as though he might retch. How can I scourge an 8-year-old boy? But if I don't, Cersei wins. See again the lens Tyrion sees the world through. It's about power, dominance, and control. Not the selfless actions of a man defending a woman, but a selfish man playing, as Tyrion sees it, the game.
You're a clever man. But you're not half as clever as you think you are.
Still makes me more clever than you.
A game for which he'll go to almost any lengths to win. We've come closer to understanding Tyrion's heart here, but just before we get into this properly, I want to quickly talk about one more important scene that really illustrates the differences between book and show Tyrion. You might even be able to guess this one if you're familiar with both versions. Feel free to pause the video now and have a think. Did you guess it? It's the moment when Tyrion kills Shae, after discovering her in Tywin's bed. Now, we don't need to deep dive into the whole moment here, like we just did, because in this case, it really all hinges on one pivotal moment, one decision by the showrunners, which again massively alters Tyrion's character. In the show, Tyrion kills Shae in self-defense. She grabs a knife and tries to stab him. They then both have a brawl where Shae keeps trying to kill and fight Tyrion, until he eventually chokes her with the chain around her neck. He's almost forced into it actually in the show, as it's kind of an equal back and forth fight between them, until he finally manages to use the chain to get the upper hand. And he nearly cries after she dies, telling her he's sorry, and even repeating it again. I mean, just look at his face here, he clearly regrets it and he's clearly distraught. This is the complete and total opposite to the book. And seriously, I can't emphasize this enough, because in the books, Tyrion comes upon Shae, who, rather than fighting him, is terrified of him. She tries to lie to Tyrion, to make him spare her, appealing to the good memories they had together. But it's not enough. Tyrion, hurt, betrayed, and humiliated, murders her in cold blood. Tyrion slid a hand under his father's chain and twisted. The links tightened, digging into her neck. He gave cold hands another twist as the warm ones beat away his tears. It's an oddly chilling passage. Notice how Tyrion twists the chain twice, emphasizing how cold and ruthless he is in this moment. There's no back and forth fight between Shae and Tyrion, and he doesn't dwell on her death in the moment like he does in the show. After this line, Tyrion immediately moves on. George R. Martin himself calls this Tyrion's blackest deed. Now, in both scenes, we see how the show tries to depict Tyrion as unambiguously good, whitewashing him and framing him on both occasions as acting either for the good of others or in self-defense. Now, you might say that one version is not necessarily better than the other, and I did promise to explain why I think the book version of Tyrion is better, aside from it just being the original. But again, just before we do that, I think what we can at least agree on at this point is that the book and show versions of the character differ significantly. And so, with this assumed common agreement, I think we can now finally move on to understanding Tyrion's heart, his true nature, and therefore understand what it is that makes the book version better. To understand Tyrion, we need to understand that he is very similar to someone he despises, his father, Lord Tywin Lannister.
The king is tired. See him to his chambers.
You may already agree with this, but what you might not know is how deep the similarities run. I talked earlier about Tyrion viewing things as a game, especially his time as the Hand of the King in King's Landing. Tyrion loves and craves power. He thinks to himself in the books, me, the dwarf, the monster, the one they scorned and laughed at. But now I hold it all. The power, the city, the girl. I do love it. We see two striking similarities here with Tywin. The first is the obvious, the love, or at least the desire, for power. And the second is the hatred of laughter. Both Tyrion and Tywin can't stand to be laughed at or mocked. He dreamed they would be so strong and brave and beautiful that no one would ever laugh at them. He could never abide being laughed at. That was the thing he hated most. And then for Tyrion, shame made him angry. He slapped her. Not hard, but hard enough. Damn you, he said. Damn you. Never mock me. Not you. This is really important. Both Tywin and Tyrion are driven by similar motives. But Tywin was able to, for the most part, achieve his goals. Bringing power and status to House Lannister. Being well respected in the Seven Kingdoms. Finding true love and companionship with his wife Joanna. Tyrion, on the other hand, is unable to do the same. We'll come back to why he can't do these things soon, but for now it's just important to understand that Tyrion's inability to satisfy these deep fundamental urges he has leads to him not only deeply craving genuine love and connection, but also being filled with self-loathing and insecurity. And so therefore, where they both can be ruthless and cruel when the need arises, Tywin's cruelty is more pragmatic and unfeeling, with Tyrion's being vengeful and savage. But not in you, father. There is no blood in Tywin Lannister. Their father had been as relentless and implacable as a glacier. Tyrion, by contrast, they would not love me living, so let them dread me dead. You make me sorry that I am not the monster you would have me be. He could think of nothing he would enjoy more, except perhaps strangling Cersei. And so with this, we can now begin to understand Tyrion's heart. Someone who desperately yearns for love, respect and connection, but can never have it. Someone who, yes, has been treated harshly and wronged, but as a result of that rejection can be cruel and unfeeling, and bitter and vengeful. Someone who enjoys power over others, and is not afraid to wield that power like a sword. Lessons taken from his father, but with a more personal, hate-filled lens. I see you have taken a few lessons from me. More than you know, father. This is where it's also important to talk about our second point, Tyrion's physical appearance. Now basically, the book Tyrion is much more physically ugly and deformed than in the show. Two miscoloured eyes, a missing nose, and misshapen, stunted features. He's frequently described as ugly and grotesque, a gargoyle, the demon imp. Tyrion's physical ugliness is important because it affects how other people view him. He is rejected by his family and society because of his looks, and his guilt is often assumed because of how much he repels people. This reflects real life. You can look up the halo effect, where people who are better looking are assumed to have other positive traits, like being trustworthy or being smart or kind. And this works the opposite for Tyrion. I mean, if Tyrion had been born looking like his brother Jaime, how different would his life have been? Tywin, for one, would have accepted him gladly. He may have been the heir to Casterly Rock and all of its power and prestige.
I'm guilty of a far more monstrous crime. I'm guilty of being a dwarf.
He'd have been Tywin's true successor, both by blood and by virtue of them being the same. Tyrion is Tywin's son, not you. I said so once to your father's face, and he would not speak to me for half a year. You are no son of mine. Now that's where you're wrong, father. Why? I believe I'm you writ small. Now, as I said earlier, Peter Dinklage did do a great job portraying Tyrion, but he's undeniably far more attractive than his book counterpart. And this bleeds into both how we and others perceive him. That and Tyrion being far more unambiguously good and sympathetic in the show. So, given all this, we again have to ask, why is the book Tyrion better than his show counterpart? Well, for me, it's the moral complexity and the motivation of the character. Show Tyrion is just much less complex than his book counterpart, and therefore, as a result, he is naturally less interesting. Moral complexity and conflict is what creates interesting stories. A story about nice people getting along just isn't that interesting. And I'm not saying Show Tyrion is like this, not at all. But in making him more likable and digestible for a mainstream audience, the show also made him less nuanced and less intriguing. They lost his heart. And I think this is really evidenced by the latter half of the TV show. I think it's fair to say that almost everyone agrees that the quality of Tyrion's character declined significantly towards the end of the show. Some of that is definitely on the writing itself, but I also think a lot of it is due to his motivation. After Tyrion leaves King's Landing in the show and heads east, what really is his motivation? What's really driving him? To me, it feels like his story ended there, and he ends up playing second fiddle to other characters with stronger motivations and stronger passions. He loses the drive and edge that made him stand out. And this is largely down to another pivotal change from the books to the show. We learn in both versions that Tyrion actually did meet somebody who loved him, a crofter's daughter named Tysha. He married her and they spent a fortnight together living happily as husband and wife, before Jaime confesses to Tyrion that the girl was actually a paid by their father to lie to Tyrion. Tywin sees to it that Tysha is brutally assaulted and while Tyrion watches on, and then she's sent on her way. In the show, the story is told by Tyrion, but it isn't really revisited and it doesn't come up again. But in the books, it's a much more prominent tale that still haunts Tyrion in the present day. When Jaime frees Tyrion from his cell, he confesses to him that he lied about Tysha being a He really did meet somebody who loved him for who he was. And this is the final straw that breaks Tyrion. This is what really makes him fully embrace his inner darkness and cruelty. I am the monster they all say I am. Yes, I killed your vile son. He made himself grin. What do you plan to offer the Dragon Queen, little man? My hate, Tyrion wanted to say. This is really important because it's the burning motivation that drives Tyrion after he goes east. His hatred of his family, of the people of Westeros, his desire to get revenge on them, all those who wronged him, but most of all his family, Jaime and Cersei. This reveal from Jaime doesn't happen in the show. They embrace as loving brothers as Tyrion leaves Westeros.
Farewell, little brother.
Whilst this is heartwarming, it robs Tyrion of the motivation that's needed for his character. His wit and intellect, in the books, become a weapon for his vengeance, coated with genuine malice. When he meets young Griff, a character who is cut from the show, he doesn't counsel peace or restraint. Instead, he actively pushes for war and destruction, encouraging him to march on King's Landing. And this darker Tyrion makes so much more sense when we understand his motivations. He's a man who tried to be good, who at least had the thought to try and rule justly as Hand of the King, despite his darker impulses. But after the betrayals he suffered, the truth about Tysha, Shay's testimony, his own family's plots against him, he embraces the monster that everyone always believed him to be. In the show, we lose this tragic arc entirely. Show Tyrion maintains his moral compass, always tries to do what's right, even when his peaceful approaches fail repeatedly. Even when his advice leads to disaster after disaster, he never fundamentally changes. He never embraces his darkness. When Daenerys finally burns King's Landing, Show Tyrion is horrified. But book Tyrion? I mean, we can't know for sure unless the story is ever finished, which I don't think it will be, but I have a feeling he'd celebrate. Dance amongst the ashes. The monster they feared. The monster they created. And for me at least, this really encapsulates why the book version of Tyrion is so much more compelling than his show counterpart. The show gives us a Tyrion who, despite everything he suffers, maintains his essential goodness. And while that makes for a more traditionally heroic character, it misses what makes Tyrion truly fascinating. It's the descent of a character into darkness. A man who was unjustly treated and rejected for something he couldn't control, who eventually becomes the villain of the story. I have a feeling that if we were to ever get the final book, we'd see Tyrion adopt a new house motto. The words of House Targaryen, fire and blood. And that's the video for today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Leave a comment to let me know what you think, and if you want to see more videos just like this, please do like and subscribe, and check out the other videos linked on the screen now. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time.